So this is the third level of setting the foundation for the course. The last layer of the foundation is sociological research. So, and this is what Auguste Comte envisioned. He envisioned by creating a new discipline that we would use the scientific method, that we would use these various forms of research in order to understand society and deal with our problems. First off, we'll talk about the different ways that we as humans gain knowledge and understanding of the world around us. We're going to define methodology, and we'll talk about three different types of scientific standards. From there, we'll kind of break down and go step by step through the scientific method. And then we will finish up talking about different types of sociological research. A lot of different ways that we gain knowledge and understanding of the world around us. We start learning really from the day that we're born. We may not fully understand what's going on, but we're dealing with different senses, different smells. We're listening to our parents talk to us. So learning really kind of does start. We become conditioned from day one. So primarily, in the beginning, we learn from people in positions of power and authority. Primarily our parents, being raised in that environment, our parents, our grandparents. Other people that would fall in line here would be, once you start going into school, you start listening to your teachers, and later on, you go into higher education. You learn from your bosses, you learn from your priests and preachers, you listen to your doctor, you listen to all these different people with positions of power and authority. But what's really important here to understand is that all of these people are human. They make mistakes. Parents make mistakes. Teachers make mistakes. Doctors make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. So to me, the sign of an educated individual will listen to people in positions of power and authority, even political people, but they'll use critical thinking and they'll think for themselves. So we have to be very careful not to be mindlessly led by people in positions of power. Number two is personal experiences. This falls in line with the sociological imagination. So if you remember, the sociological imagination says our experiences shape our perception of the world around us. You could probably think of all different ways throughout your life that you have learned from your experiences, from your successes, from your failures. A lot of times we probably learn more from our failures and where we mess up than actually our successes. But that's not a bad thing. That's good. I think that's why elderly people are so wise, because they've messed up so much throughout their lives that they've learned how to do it better, and they've kind of passed that on. So as long as we're learning from our experiences and we're learning from our mishaps and our failures, then it's really not a failure. The problem is if we don't learn from it, we keep repeating these bad patterns. Another way that we learn culturally. We learn from our family, from the society that we're raised in, cultural traditions that are passed down from one generation to the next. We learn from holiday traditions. I mean, we just kind of are absorbed in this type of cultural knowledge, things that are passed down from one generation to the next. Could be as simple as recipes or family traditions. So we also learn from those aspects as well. Religiously, spiritually, some people are very religious, and so they learn from their priests, their preachers, their rabbis, their holy books, their holy scriptures, the way that they're raised from their family. Some people may be more spiritual and really not so religious, and so they may look in other spiritual aspects in order to learn and evolve as a human being. Probably more so now than ever before, we get a lot of our information, our learning from the news, 24-hour news cycle, and also the media. This also really kind of ties into people in positions of power and authority, where I mentioned that it's really important to question, to be open-minded, and to really critique information yourself and not blindly follow a particular news network, 24-hour cycle of getting all your information. maybe objectively look at various ones and try to put all the pieces together, because unfortunately there usually is a bias, a political bias, a religious bias, a cultural bias. So again, anytime you're getting information from the internet, always try to look at it through a critical lens and don't just automatically believe that it's true information. Because once you start buying into this is always true, then you're easily led as an individual. You can be easily manipulated. So got to be really mindful of that. And that kind of moves us into science. This is where sociology and other disciplines are really kind of moving forward, because science has the burden of proof. Unlike the media and all these other elements here and religion, they don't really have to prove any of those things. That's just their belief system. But when it comes to science, biology, chemistry, sociology, anthropology, medicine, whatever it is, if they're going to throw something out in the world and say, hey, we believe this to be valid, accurate information, then we typically say, well, show me the proof. You need to show the evidence. And so this is where sociology is going to fall in line right here. It's going to be their major focus is to use research to try to back up the things they say. Now, with that said, sociology does not refute religion. It does not refute tradition. It does not refute authority. It analyzes it. It studies it. All right? So I don't want you to think that sociology only focuses on science and it throws the rest of them out and say it's nonsense. Sociology actually studies those. So let's take a look at sociological research. The first definition we'll talk about is called methodology. All sciences, all disciplines use research methodology. And it is the proper methods, the proper protocol of conducting research, the do's and the don'ts. So this is the process of conducting empirical or scientific research through collecting data, developing your hypothesis, testing those hypotheses, and using the scientific method. The proper methods of research. Now, along with that, we have 3 scientific standards that are very important. The first one is without a doubt the most important. This is objectivity, being objective, being open-minded. And what this states is that anytime you're doing any type of research on any discipline, it's very important for the researcher, the social scientist, to be objective, to be open-minded, to be unbiased, to allow the data or the facts to show exactly what it is, even if you don't like it, even if it's contrary to your beliefs, if it's contrary to your hypothesis. Let the facts show what it shows, being objective. Number 2, precision of data collection. Basically what this says is, however you decide to collect data needs to be the best way possible for your hypothesis or your research. So whether it's interviews or surveys or observations or experiments, however you decide to collect that data, try to choose the best one, most precise possible. And that ties into number 3, replication of research. What this means here is that before you ever get to publication, is that you have to set up your research in a way that it can be replicated, not only by you, but also the scientific community, because they have to be able to check your work. Before you ever get to publication, you're going to submit it to be published. You're going to have peers within your discipline review the research and determine if they feel that this is accurate and valid information. So you have to set up your research design in a way that it can be replicated, because it will be checked. And if they check your research and they find that there are flaws, there are issues with it, then you will not get to publication. They will kick it back to you and reject it. You may have to work on it again, which is a good thing. You want a peer review. You don't want to be able to just submit something to a professional academic journal and then automatically get published just because of who you are. All right? So those are 3 basic scientific standards. So let's go through the scientific method. We're going to go through numerically each one. So we'll start off first taking a look at number 1, which is the purpose. All research, regardless of the discipline, starts with a question or a curiosity. There's something that is confusing. There's something that you may not understand or know. There's something you want to know more about. All research starts with a question. And it could be anything. You could have questions about the pandemic, homelessness, crime, sexuality. It doesn't matter. Whatever is something happening in society that piques your curiosity or concern, this is going to be step one of the scientific method. What is the purpose of you moving forward? Step two is going to be the research. So now that you have a question, now you have to figure out, has anybody else had the same question? What research has been done on this question? So this is where you're going to start doing your homework. You're going to be looking through professional academic journals. You're going to be going online. You're going to be pulling all the information you could possibly find, and you're going to want this information that you use or look at to be reliable information. And it's usually broken down into two different categories: primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are sources from the original author themselves. So it could be an autobiography by Anne Frank. It could be World War I letters that are written by the soldiers themselves back home. It could be primary audio or video that's been used by the original source themselves. It could be works of art. It could be all different types of things. These are primary sources that you are actually kind of bringing in. Even the U.S. Census that deals with demographic information is also considered a primary source. Secondary sources, you can also use all this information to kind of jumpstart your research, but secondary sources are going to be interpreted by somebody else. So dictionaries, biographies, somebody who writes a book about somebody else, you could pull that information if it's factual. College textbooks are also examples of secondary sources. The textbook that you have for this class has 3 authors, but all the information in the book has a lot of other sources. And if you look at the back of the book, you'll see the references. And so the 3 authors didn't write the book. They basically collected a lot of data from other sources, and they collectively kind of put it together to create your textbook. So the reason this is so important, number 2, research, is it allows you to figure out where you're going to position your research. So number 1, you may figure out that, you know what, my question has been answered. So I'm going to go do something else. Somebody's already done the research for me. Number 2, you may find that nobody has any information about this. There's no research on this at all. And so that tells you that you are at the ground floor working up. The third scenario is that you could use all this data and information to elevate you to a certain point, and then you can build upon that to take it higher to the next level. That's why this is so critical, because it tells you, do you stop and do something else? Do you start at the bottom, or do you actually build upon that? Now, if you use any of these sources in your research, the main thing you have to remember to do is to give them credit for it. You cannot take credit for any of these resources, all right? So these are called primary and secondary sources. And what that does, that leads you to step 3. Now you've done all your homework. Now you're going to develop your hypothesis. And this is what you're actually going to be testing. Your hypothesis is your educated guess. It is a prediction of a social phenomenon or an event. It's what you think will occur. So it's a prediction of a social phenomenon. It's a statement that you write out that can be tested. You can gather data to actually test it. And typically what you're testing are 2 different variables within it. A lot of times a hypothesis will start off, if such and such and such, comma, then I predict this will occur. If, comma, then. Now, on the if and the then side, that's where you have the 2 variables that are actually moving. because your prediction is that the variables are connected in some sort of way, and that's referred to as a directional hypothesis. Directional hypothesis means that you believe that there's two variables that are connected to each other, and if you manipulate one, it can influence the other. A direct relationship is a prediction whenever the variables will move in the same direction. If you manipulate one variable up, the other one will move up with it. If it's an inverse or indirect relationship, this means as one variable goes up, the other one goes down. They are actually inversely related to each other. And I'll give you a couple examples. And the variable is basically anything that varies. The lighting in this room, the temperature, the number of years you've been married. It's something that varies and changes. So I'll give you an example. If an individual increases their sexual partners, then I predict that the odds of them getting an STD will increase. So that would be a direct relationship. The two variables are moving upward. You're increasing your sexual partners, you're increasing your odds of an STD. But what goes up goes down. If you decrease your number of sexual partners in your monogamous relationship, the odds of you getting an STD will go down. So that's a direct relationship. Another one, if a family increases their annual income, then the odds of them getting divorced will go down. That's going to be a variable there. So, and that's the prediction. The prediction is that the American family, if they start to increase their income, they're more stable, they're not as financially stressed, and the odds of them getting divorced goes down. And you could look at the other way. Whenever people go through severe financial hardships, you may predict that the odds of them getting divorced will go up. That's that inverse type of relationship. When it comes to a null hypothesis, this is a prediction that the variables are not connected to each other. That you could manipulate one and it's not going to affect another. Now remember, this is just your prediction. You don't know if this is true. Just based on the evidence, this is what you think. You haven't actually tested it yet. So your null hypothesis may be if you increase the income of a family, then the prediction is there's no connection to divorce rates at all. So if that is your prediction, that there's no connection between those variables, that's going to be referred to a null hypothesis. So this is where you start with just basic kind of building your testable statement. And so after you've built your statement that you're actually going to test, now you have to figure out, well, how am I going to collect the data? And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, and it really depends on how you write your particular hypothesis. Because for some hypotheses, it may be just pulling statistical data. For other hypotheses or predictions, you may need to do some observations of certain types of people. Number one are surveys. These are the most common types of research design, a survey or a questionnaire. It doesn't mean it's the best. The reason it's the most common is because it's easy, it's quick, it's fast, and it's cheap. It doesn't mean it's the best though. But there are some issues with surveys and questionnaires. You have to be very careful how you write them, because the way that you write them, people may interpret the way you're asking the question in different ways. So it's not foolproof. You do have to be very meticulous in the way that you write these questions or surveys, because you want to make sure that whoever's reading this, they fully understand what you're actually asking them, all right? Your population is your target audience. So who are you going to be sending the survey to? It could be attorneys, it could be architects, it could be dentists, it could be all different types of people that you want information from. So your population is your target audience. Your sample is a smaller percentage that represents the population. So the population is the entire target audience. And a lot of times you may not be able to send a survey or questionnaire to the entire population. So you'll have to choose a sample size. The rule of thumb is that the larger the sample size, the better, because it is more representative of the population. So let's say you have 100,000 dentists in Arkansas, and you want to ask them some questions. You want to send them a survey. If you have an option of sending 10,000 of those 100,000 a survey, or 50,000 of those 100,000, you would choose the 50,000, because the 50,000 is going to be more of an accurate representative of the 100,000, because the sample size is much larger. The second thing you have to be mindful of is also a random sample. If you're able to set this up where everybody in the population has an equal and fair chance of getting chosen, it increases objectivity. So if you're able to increase the randomness of the sample size, that's going to be really, really important. And typically the way that they do that is they will run the population through a computer software, and it will automatically randomly select a certain number that will actually receive this particular survey or questionnaire. So the larger the sample size, important, and also randomly sampled. Number two, very commonly used in sociology. And the great thing about secondary analysis is that it's readily available, and it's typically really reliable information that's already out there. So this is information that is already out there that you can use. You haven't conducted it yourself. It's already out there. A good example of that is the U.S. Census, and that's actually a hyperlink you can click on. So the U.S. Census comes out every 10 years, and it takes a look at demographic information. It's used all the time in sociology to look at trends in society, what's happening, migration patterns, race, ethnicity, marriage, household, a wealth of information. Another example that is really used a lot, not only in sociology, but also in criminal justice, is called the Uniform Crime Report. And this is a report. You can go to FBI.gov, and you can actually take a look at the Uniform Crime Report. This is whenever you have local and state law enforcement, they send all their reported crimes, violent crimes and property crimes, to the FBI each year. And the FBI makes a massive annual report to show the trends of what's happening in regards to crimes in America. It runs nationally, regionally, state to state, city to city. It is very expansive. And it's really important because it shows us what is happening with crime rates around the country. Another example of secondary analysis is, let's say you go to the Conway County Courthouse and you pull up some information about marriage records, death records, birth records, divorce records. Those are all referred to as vital statistics that we have access to. That's also secondary analysis as well. The third one is called observational research. This can take a whole lot longer. Observational research could take weeks, months, years, or even decades because you are observing what people are doing. This can take a long time. It can be very, very expensive. There has been research that has been done by Harvard University and other high-end universities that have done longitudinal studies over people throughout the course of their entire lives. They followed them from the moment they were born until they died, up to 100 years. It's called a longitudinal study. They've observed them, the choices that they've made, their situations at home, the choices that they made as adults. They've kind of followed them. So you can see how that could be a very extensive study. But for their particular hypothesis on what they're testing, it may be the best thing to do. So if we break down observational research where we are observing people, there's usually three main categories. One is in a highly controlled environment. It's called a laboratory observation. So let's say you have little kids, toddlers, and you're wanting to really kind of observe them in a play situation. Are they going to be playing together? Are they going to segregate based on their sex? Do they play with different toys? To them, they're having a play date. To you, as the observer, you're looking through a two-way mirror or glass. They can't see you. You're just kind of observing, or you're looking through webcams. You're trying to observe on the interactions between them in a very controlled type of environment. The second type of observation is called a field observation. And this is whenever you're watching people in their natural environment. If you are going to the city park, or you're in Starbucks, or you're walking around the mall, and you're people watching, and you're observing certain groups of people, and you're kind of taking notes about what they're actually doing, and you're observing them through their natural day-to-day environment. This is referred to as a field observation. The third one we have talked about before, and this is called participant observation. And if you remember, this is where the researcher goes undercover and they actually become part of the subculture, the group, or the counterculture. And a lot of times they're going to want to infiltrate this particular group without being known. All three of these things, there's one thing that's usually very important, is that for the most part, the subjects do not need to know that they're being watched or observed. Because if the subjects realize that they're being watched or observed, sometimes it can modify their behavior and they start acting better. Most of the time, people, they're on their P's and Q's and they're doing their best and they feel like they're being watched. So there's a fine line with observational research, because you have to give enough consent where the subjects may understand that they give some level of consent on what can be viewed, but you don't want to give them so much information where it's actually contaminated. So there's this fine balance with ethics and consent. So the one thing you do have to be mindful of is referred to as the Hawthorne effect. And this occurs whenever participants that you're observing, they get wind that they're being watched and their behavior starts to change because of that. And if that happens, it could actually contaminate the results, because what you're seeing is not authentic. They're acting. So you really want to try to avoid the Hawthorne effect. If the little kids realize they're being observed, then their behavior may change. And I'll give you a quick example of this. Many years ago, whenever my kids were in daycare, one of my sons came home and he started having like bite marks on his back. And so I decided that I was going to park a little bit away from the daycare whenever they were outside playing, and I was just going to kind of observe from afar to see the interactions between the kids and also the teachers and stuff like that, because there was never an incident report. We couldn't really get any good information, so I decided to park a little bit away, and I just decided to observe from afar. And I noticed that the kids weren't being watched very well. The kids were kind of fighting among themselves. And it seemed like the place was understaffed, and it seemed like the teachers were kind of preoccupied, kind of doing some other things. So I guess the question for you is, if any of the teachers or staff would have noticed me afar in my car, do you think that their behavior on the playground may have changed any? Definitely, it definitely would have changed, because they would have seen a parent actually watching. So I was trying to avoid the Hawthorne effect, because I wanted to see how things are in their natural type of environment. And whenever I used to run an assisted living facility in Baton Rouge, there were times where I would pop in there at 2 o'clock in the morning to see what was going on with my staff. And that kind of kept them on their toes as well. So I wanted to kind of show up at weird times and just kind of walk in at 2 o'clock in the morning to see what was going on. And so that's one management tool there. So these are probably the three main types of research designs. Do we have any questions about any of this? No. All right. So the next step is, after you've conducted your research, now you're going to analyze the data that's actually coming in. You're going to try to figure out, does the data show that my hypothesis is valid, which valid means correct. If it's invalid, or if you feel like it's incorrect, or does the data, is it inconclusive? Do you feel, you know what, I can't definitively say that my hypothesis is correct or not. There's not enough information. So during this process, if you're dealing with quantitative measurements, like dealing with numbers or percentages, statistics, stuff like that, you may be able to use what's called descriptive statistics within your research. And this is very common dealing with numbers, especially with surveys, sending out surveys and questionnaires, because it's usually broken down in like a numerical format. So these are the four main things that you can put in your research that deal with numbers. It's called the mean, the mode, the median, and the range. The mean is going to be the average. So if you have a certain number of subjects with certain ages, you can figure out the average age of the subjects that you're analyzing. Or if you're talking about temperatures, hormone levels, whatever it is, you add up all the numbers and you divide by that number, you get the mean. A lot of times people get mean and median mixed up. The mean is the average, the mode is the middle number. So if you were looking at the median income in America, it's not going to be the average income of American families. It's going to be that exact middle number from the lowest all the way up to the highest. So that's why you see here on this chart, the mean or the average of these numbers is 5, but the median or that middle number is 6. The mode, there may be a mode, but there may not be a mode. If all the numbers are different statistically, there's no mode. If there's one number, temperature, hormones, age of subjects, number of years marriage, whatever the number is, if there's more of that number than other numbers, that is referred to as the mode. So for this series of numbers, just like the median, the mode is going to be 6. The last part of descriptive statistics is going to be the range, which starts from what is the difference between the lowest number all the way up to the highest number. So if you have 1 to 8, the range right there is going to be 7. Some research has descriptive statistics, some research does not, but definitely be mindful of the differences between these. The main thing that you would have to be really concerned about if you move into any type of statistical course in the future, or even just as a consumer listening to the radio, when they start talking about the mean or the median of what's happening in society, I just want you to have a fundamental understanding that there's a big difference between the mean and also the median. All right. So you'll analyze the data, and then after you've analyzed the data in regards to your hypothesis, at this point here, now you're going to draw conclusions. If you feel that your hypothesis is valid or correct, one thing that would be important to do is to run the numbers again, to retest it. Because what you're looking for here is called reliability. You're looking for validity and reliability. Both of those are important. Validity means it's accurate. Reliability or reliable, it means it's consistent. Now you can be consistently wrong, right? You can be consistently wrong. So what you're looking for is that you're hoping that your hypothesis is both valid and also the data keeps coming back stronger, saying that, hey, this is consistent. If the research appears to be reliable, this would be the point here where you feel confident enough in your research that you can submit it to a professional academic journal to be scrutinized by your peers and hopefully get to a point of publication. This is the point here where you feel very confident that you have something that is publishable, and you feel that your hypothesis may actually be a theory at this point. We use hypothesis and theory interchangeably in our words all the time. They are not the same thing. Your hypothesis is your educated guess before you have tested. Your theory is something that explains a social phenomenon because it has been rigorously tested and been deemed to be both valuable, reliable, and valid. Essentially what happens is your hypothesis morphs and evolves into a theory that explains something. But this does not mean that your theory is a fact, even if it's published. It means that it is backed up by hard evidence. It is accepted by the community as being accurate information. but there can always be more data that comes forward later on in the future that can completely dispute the theory completely. And that's a good thing, because we want science to continuously evolve and to change. So just because it's a theory does not mean it is a fact. So as you can see, from the point of a question or a curiosity to the point of getting something published in a professional academic journal, that is a huge leap. That is a massive leap. A lot of people will set up websites and blogs and all this kind of stuff, and they'll throw their information, they'll publish it out on the media or social media for the whole world to see. But anytime you're reading something from a professional academic journal, you can be rest assured that it's heavily scrutinized. And this is why some instructors and some university professors will only take sources from professional academic journals, and it's because of this. All right. Let's move in and talk about some different types of sociological research. So now that we've kind of laid down the foundation, we've talked about the scientific method, we've kind of gone through the steps. Now let's talk a little bit more specifically about different types of research. The first one is called exploratory research. And what's happening here is that you're exploring some sort of new social phenomenon in society. It's brand new. It's changed things tremendously. But we don't know the effects of it. At one time, believe it or not, there was no texting, which seems weird. But there was a time period where there's no texting at all. And once we started getting these smartphones and started to text, it changed completely the way that we communicate with each other. Family to family, couple to couple, worldwide. It completely changed things. So what exploratory research would explore the effects of a new phenomenon, the internet, texting, the effects of texting and driving, even the pandemic that we're finally moving out of, is that we don't know the long-term effects of COVID yet. We don't know the long-term effects of the vaccines. We don't know the long-term effects of having long COVID if you decided to maybe not get the vaccination. We don't know the long-term social and psychological effects of having the schools shut down and have the kids go home for months on end in their room. We don't know that yet. And there's a chance we're probably not going to fully understand the long-term effects of this until probably a couple of decades. And there are social scientists today that are going to be working with young people and studying young people, and they're going to be talking about, how did this affect you as a young person going home and the school shutting down? What are some things that you did? And then later on, as they become teenagers, what choices did you make? And how did this affect them a little bit later on in life? So a lot of times when it comes to exploratory research, we may not know the effects until a little bit later on down the road. The next one is called descriptive research. And the purpose of this is to describe some sort of social phenomenon that's happening in society. So, and it usually starts with like a what question. It could be what or how many. It kind of describes the social world around us. So for this particular question here, it says, what are the divorce rates based on age groups? If that is your question, if that's something you're wanting to know. And here's some statistical information that is kind of showing the breakdown here. And it appears to be that some of the highest divorce rates are those that are very young, 15 to 24. And it looks at, as you get older and older, the odds of you getting divorced goes down. So the appropriate question is, after you see this, because we can measure, this is very measurable. We know who's getting divorced every year because it goes through the court system. We know their ages. We can get this information very reliably. The question would be, why do you think the trend is? What do you think would be some contributing factors and why young people are more likely to get divorced than, say, older people? What do y'all think?
Because their critical thinking isn't developed, their frontal lobe isn't developed, they're kind of risky. Mm-hmm. That isn't developed until like 25, I think, really.
That is true. It's around 25.
Which makes sense because it's 15 to 24.
Yeah. You know, think of any other factors besides brain development. That could be why young people are more likely to get divorced.
I don't think young people really know who they themselves want to be
Yes.
until, I would say, 30.
Yes.
And I wish I would have. I was a completely different person at 30 years old than I was at 20 years old,
Yeah.
or even 25. I mean, my way of thinking, my interests.
No life experience.
I mean,
So there's less life experience, yeah.
I didn't even really know what I needed in a wife probably until 30 years old.
Mm-hmm. There's more issues of immaturity. If they have children, there's the stress of being a teenage parent. At this age, obviously, they're probably, especially if they're teenagers, they're probably not very educated. They don't have as much life experience. As you get older, you do learn how to communicate and even argue or debate more effectively and more reasonably. And also, the older you get, you're probably less likely to be struggling and living in poverty as well. So, a lot of different factors. So those were all really good ones. Yes. The next one is called explanatory research, and so this is attempts to explain why something is actually happening. So there's usually a cause and effect relationship. You know something has occurred, but you're curious as to why it actually happened. And this is a phenomenon that's been happening for the last several decades. Why is there a rise of young adults living at home? If we go back to the 1950s and 1960s, most young people at age 18, when they graduated high school, they moved out of the house or they moved into a dorm, they went off to college, they joined the military. A lot of them between 18 and 21 were getting married during that time, so they were actually moving out. What we are experiencing now is called an extension of adolescence. This means that more young people are staying home longer and longer and longer than ever before any previous generation. And you can actually see the numbers right here. If you go back to 1960, there was only around 2.5 million, and it's gone up to probably around 7.6 million now. So the question would be, young adults aged 25 to 34 are living at home longer. What do y'all think could be some of the contributing? Yeah, what do you think could be the contributing factors why people are staying home so long? Well, we know that marriage is being delayed, right? We know that. What do y'all think about higher education? You think it's increased over the years? So people are going to college more. What could be another factor that would keep young adults staying at home longer instead of venturing out?
Helicopter parents
Could be helicopter parents, yeah.
are enabling their
So
children.
maybe they haven't encouraged them to leave the nest.
It's harder to live on. I'm sorry. So,
Honestly, there's just money. More
yeah,
expensive.
it's
More
more
expensive.
It is expensive. Everything's gone. Rent is very, very expensive. So the financial, is that what you're going to tie into? It's expensive.
used to, it was common practice. You know, women stayed home. I'm not saying that was their role, but you could afford that. You could live off of one income. You can't really live off one income now
Unless you're doing really well.
Unless you're on Walmart.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of factors. So, education, continue their education. It's expensive to move out. People are delaying marriage longer and longer. Helicopter parent could be a factor in there. They may have a good relationship. And a lot of this may just be financial. They may be thinking to themselves that, you know what, while I'm going through college, it may be just smarter for me just to kind of stay at home, especially if I have a good relationship with my parents, to stay home, be a full-time student, and just kind of get through college, and then maybe I'll move out afterwards. So the mindset over the last several decades has changed quite a bit. Very good.
then they get a degree that they can't get a job with and they're stuck.
And another phenomenon that occurs, I talk about in my marriage and family course, is boomerang children. There's an increase of phenomenon of young adults that leave the nest, they leave the house, and then something happens in their lives. They maybe job loss, could be a divorce, could be addiction, and they find themselves coming home back to their parents temporarily so they get back on their feet. It's called boomerang child. Yeah, that's increasing as well.
My sister is getting a divorce and is doing that right now. It's
Yeah.
kind of interesting seeing that play out. Just their dynamic of being back home and realizing that even though she's grown, my mother still expects certain things from her. And she's thinking, I'm a grown woman with a master's degree, you know. My mom does not care.
Yeah.
She does not care.
She's like, you're under my household,
Yeah.
right?
You don't like it, you can get out.
Yeah. Any questions about any of that we talked about? All right, let me pull up the review. We'll do a review. Just take a look at it. And yeah. All right. All right. Participant observation, also known as ethnography. I hadn't really mentioned that, but it is also known as ethnography. What is the situation that's happening here with participant observation?
The researcher becomes a part of the study.
Yeah, the researcher actively becomes part of the study by engulfing themselves among the group they are studying. If you remember when we talked about the Chicago school, those sociology graduate students went to the inner cities. It was referred to as urban participant observation or urban ethnography. Yeah, that's what that is. Okay. This refers to the rules and guidelines followed in scientific research. C, methodology. One of these is the most common way sociologists collect data to test their hypothesis. What's that?
Surveys.
Surveys, yeah. Surveys are the most common, yeah. A relationship within the hypothesis where it is predicted that the variables are related and they will move in the opposite direction of each other. C, inverse relationship. Allowing the research to go where it leads without bias and with an open mind refers to the importance of this. A, objectivity. A relationship within the hypothesis where it's predicted that the variables are related and they will move in the same direction. A direct relationship. A smaller representative of a target audience in a survey is called this. Sample. A relationship within a hypothesis where it's predicted that variables are not related and manipulating one variable will not affect the other. It's your null hypothesis. An educated guess or a prediction of a social phenomenon is called this. It's your hypothesis, yep. An explanation of a social phenomenon backed with evidence, validity, and reliability. This is going to be a theory. Sources used in research from the original author are called these. Primary sources. This occurs when subjects realize they're being watched and their behavior changes, possibly rendering the data unusable. Hawthorne effect, B. Research data collected from the U.S. Census, crime statistics, court records such as marriage license or death certificates are examples of this. C, secondary analysis. The target audience of a survey is called this. Population, yeah. Like who are you sending it to? In descriptive statistics, the average of the numbers is this. It's going to be the mean. That's right. The most common number is this. Mode. That's right. The middle number in a series of numbers is this. It's going to be the median. That's right. And just to kind of give you a little bit of example of how the median and the mean and the median are different, if you were to take the average income of the American family and you wanted to get the average, let's say that we were able to discover it's $80,000 per family on average, right? But if you were to take a series of all the incomes in the country from being homeless to being a multi-billionaire, that extensive, right? And if you were to follow along the spectrum to the middle line right there, you may find that that middle line is $750,000 instead of 75,000. Instead of, see, that's how drastic it can be, right? So if you're doing the average, it all combines it together. If you're doing the middle, if you got people that are billionaires, then if you do that exact middle number, there may be a huge difference between the median and the mean. Okay. The difference between the highest number and the lowest number is this, range. In descriptive statistics, there's always a mode. False. Yep. If all the numbers are different, there's no mode. This type of sociological research investigates a new social phenomenon in society and attempts to understand its impact. Exploratory. Yeah, exploring it. All right. Great. Okay, so let me open up Chapter 3 quiz. I'll let y'all work on that.